see everyone. Glad to be here tonight. Yes? You say something, sir? Huh? Look, I didn't step on it. How's that? All right. Glad to be here tonight. I feel like last time maybe I did not make things as clear as I should have done. So I want to try to make it really clear tonight. And if you don't get it tonight, then you got to ask somebody else, because this is the clearest way I know to say it. The first thing to understand, look at the book of Isaiah. The first thing you need to understand, Isaiah prophesies more about Christ and His kingdom than all the other prophets combined. God gave him a beautiful insight into the Messiah and His kingdom, even though he lived approximately 800 years before Jesus left heaven and came to earth. Now, the place to start when we talk about the Lord's kingdom is Isaiah chapter 2. In chapter 1, he explains that Jerusalem was corrupt. Now, Jerusalem was the capital of America? Should have been. Judah. And God explained how corrupt they had become, and that He would bring them low by allowing their enemies to come in and carry them into captivity. Now, the Assyrians carried the northern kingdom into captivity about 722, and then Babylon carried Jerusalem and Judah into captivity around 586. We don't know exact, these dates are not exact. They're pretty close, probably, maybe. But now we have him contrasting how horrible Jerusalem is in chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, Jerusalem is going to be exalted. Now, how is Jerusalem going to be exalted? Well, let's look at chapter 2, verse 2. Notice the first phrase he uses. It shall come to pass. What does that mean? It's going to happen. How do you know it's going to happen? Because God said it, right? It's going to happen. This is going to happen. It shall come to pass. And then the next phrase you need to understand is in the last days. So we have to understand what that term means to know when this is going to happen. Now, we have all the revelation of God. Isaiah and the prophets only had part. We have all of God's revelation. In the last days, what does that mean? In Daniel 2:28, the king of Babylon, whose name was Nebuchadnezzar, had this dream. And he called in all his soothsayers and wise men, wanted them to, he wasn't even going to tell them the dream. He's a really neat guy. They got to tell him what the dream is, and then they got to tell him what it means. And finally he says, if you don't do it, you're going to be put to death. And Daniel steps up, who is in the captivity from Judah, Daniel. And Daniel says in verse 28, the God of heaven has told you, has revealed to you through Daniel what's going to come to pass in the latter times. Same word in Hebrew. Well, what's going to happen? Well, he had this, Daniel explained, he had this dream of this great image. And he explained that each part of that image represented a world empire that was coming to the earth. And he said, Nebuchadnezzar, you are the golden head of this image. So Nebuchadnezzar represented Babylon. We look at world history, and we understand that when Babylon did fall, like God said it was fall, the Medo-Persian Empire was the next worldwide kingdom. And he told them they would fall. And then we know from world history the next worldwide empire was the Macedonian or the Greek Empire. And then when the Greek Empire fell, the Romans came as the world dominating power. And Daniel explains to Nebuchadnezzar in verse 44, if you're in Daniel 2, look at verse 44, he explained to Nebuchadnezzar, look, it's in the days of these kings. That's the last world empire. That was the Roman Empire. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Now, all these other three kingdoms, what happened to them? They fell. But Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, look, in the days of these kings, God's going to set up a kingdom. It's not going to be like these other ones. It will never be destroyed. And in the last part of the verse of Daniel 2:44, he said, it will stand how long? Forever. In chapter 7, verse 13 and following, you have one likened to the Son of Man coming up in the clouds, and he receives a kingdom from the Ancient of Days. Now, the Ancient of Days in the Old Testament referred to God the Father, and God the Father gave him a kingdom that would last forever. So what do we know? Isaiah tells us the Lord is going to bring a new kingdom. And it will never be destroyed like the physical kingdoms of earth. When Jesus was here on the earth in John 18:36, you remember what he said? My kingdom is not of this earth. Now people will tell you, will say, well, that just means it's not a lustly empire. No, that's not what it means. He explained, if we'd listened to him, in John 18:36, exactly what he meant. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, then what? See, that's what he's talking about. It's not a worldly, physical empire like Solomon ruled over, David ruled over. This is going to be a spiritual kingdom. Jesus is going to be the king of this kingdom, but this kingdom is not determined by political boundaries. This is a spiritual kingdom. This kingdom will not advance itself by physical warfare. Now, when the radical Muslims tell you it's all right for them to kill women and children, which the radical ones do that, anybody says they don't, they're on the mothership. They do that. Not every Muslim is that radical, but there are some who believe they should advance their empire by the sword. Jesus said, my kingdom's not going to be like that. It's not a physical, earthly, political kingdom. It's a spiritual kingdom where he rules in the hearts of men and women. All right, now go back to Isaiah 2. In the last days is when this is going to happen. The mountain of the Lord's house will be established in the top of the mountains. That's the next phrase you have to define. You can't just say, in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house. You got to know what each one of these phrases mean. Okay, what does that mean? Well, when we look in Zechariah 8. Zechariah 8, look at verse 3. Thus saith the Lord, I am returned unto Zion, and will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be called a city of war. Is that what it says? That's not what it says, is it? Jerusalem will be called a mighty city of war. No, that's not what he says. He says it shall be called a city of truth. You can easily see the difference here between the political empire and the spiritual. His is going to be a kingdom of truth. Can you imagine what Pilate thought when Jesus explained to him that his kingdom was a city of truth? That when he said, my kingdom's not of this world, but it's a kingdom of the truth. You can imagine how that worldly-minded, murdering, and many other words we can put on there, felt about Jesus. He thought, this guy, he's not any threat to Rome. He's the king of truth. And then he asked Jesus in John 18:37, what is truth? That's his skeptical attitude of truth, like many today. But God's kingdom is going to be called a city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Now, what did he say in Isaiah chapter 2? What did he say in chapter 2 and verse 2? It will come to pass in the last day, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established in the top of the hills and shall be exalted above the mountains. So we understand that when the Old Testament prophets, when they talked about a government, they used the term mountain. Look with me in Jeremiah 51, right after Isaiah. Look in Jeremiah 51. And look with me in verse 25. Jeremiah 51, verse 25. Behold, I am against thee, O destroying mountain. He's talking about Babylon. And what's he calling? A destroying mountain. That's the kind of government they were. They ruled by fear. Killing people, raping women, just doing horrible things to people, and then saying, I tell you what, you give us any more trouble, we'll come back and we'll do a lot worse than this. And they were the strongest empire in the world. That's how they conquered. All right? I am against thee, O destroying mountain, saith the Lord, which destroyeth all the earth. And I will stretch out my hand upon thee, and roll thee down from the rocks, and I will make thee a burnt mountain. So you see from the Old Testament, the word mountain is often used to describe government. So when he tells us in Isaiah 2 verse 2, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established. He's not talking about a physical mountain or a physical house. 2 Timothy 3:15. In the New Testament, Paul said to Timothy, if I tarry long that you may know how you ought to behave yourself in the what? House of God. In Ephesians 2, the last several verses, it describes the church as a spiritual temple. That word temple in the Greek means dwelling place. It's a house, not a physical house. It's a house where God lives. God lives in His own people. He lives in us. Every day we live, we talk a certain way, we act a certain way, because we know God's with us. We know we make up His house. Now look back in Isaiah 2 and verse 3. Many people will say, "Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord," that he said he was going to establish in verse 2. In verse 3, they're saying, "Let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us of His ways, and we will" what? We're going to walk in His paths. That's us. Yeah, we're Americans. I love America too. But our number one concern is not our own rights. That's not our number one concern. Our number one concern is walking in the paths of God. And when we do that, wonderful things happen. And He's going to tell us about it. He's going to teach us His ways. We're going to walk in His paths. For out of Zion will go forth the law and the word of the Lord from where? So where's all this going to start? Salt Lake City. That's where the Mormon Church, that's where they started. Salt Lake City. But the mountain of the Lord's house, it is going to begin in the city of Jerusalem. You may know Mormon people that are very kind and considerate and very good people. I wouldn't argue that for a minute. I've got to know some of them. Very nice chaps. But when they tell me, well, our church is started in Salt Lake City, I know it's not the kingdom of the Lord. I know that. Don't judge. I tell you what, you better pick up this Bible and you better judge what religious people say, because you're going to be judged by it, by the Lord. This is all going to begin from Jerusalem. That's where the word's going to spread out, and it's going to go all over the world, and it's going to cover the earth like the oceans. Do you remember what Paul said? We have preached the gospel to every creature under heaven. In the first century, they took that serious, that we're supposed to take this to all these lost people. We don't just let them go to hell because they're sorry and we don't like them. We take them the truth. So this is all going to begin in Jerusalem. Now look in Luke 24, when Jesus had been resurrected and He appears to His apostles. The last chapter of the book of Luke, chapter 24, and look at verse 44. Luke 24, 44. Look at these words. These are the words that I spake unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled in the law of Moses. That's the first 5 books of the Bible, and in the prophets, and in the Psalms, concerning who? Concerning me. Then He opened their understanding that they could understand the Scriptures. He explained it to them. He made it clear to them. 46. And He said, Thus it is written, and thus it behooved Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead the third day, that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in His name among all nations, beginning at Salt Lake City. Where did Jesus say it was going to start? Where did Isaiah say all this was going to start? So we have the fulfillment of what Isaiah was prophesying about right here in the New Testament. Look in Acts chapter 1. You remember even the apostles had a problem understanding the kingdom. I misunderstood it most of my life, but I didn't feel too bad when I found out the apostles didn't get it either. Look at Acts 1:6. When they are come together, this after He's been resurrected, they ask Him, "You going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" You see, they're still looking for that physical kingdom. He said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father has put in His own power, but this is not what you worry about. This is the point. But you shall receive power after the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be witnesses of me in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the earth." Isaiah told us the Word is going to cover the earth like the oceans. Jesus said, as Isaiah said, it's all going to begin in Jerusalem. So, you see, He's not talking about heaven. He's talking about the church, which is God's kingdom on this earth. Jesus is the king. We are the citizens. He speaks. We obey. The church is not a democracy. You don't believe the church is a democracy? It's not. The church is a theocracy. Jesus is the only head of the church, and when He speaks to us through His new covenant, it doesn't matter who we are, what we feel, how we've been raised, whatever. When He speaks, He is the absolute monarch. We obey. John 14:15. If you love me, what do? We do it because we love Him. We don't do Him because there's a sword at our throat saying, if you don't convert, this is it. Well, who wouldn't convert to that? It's not a sword at our... He doesn't make us. He says, whosoever will, let him partake of the water of life freely. It's our choice. What did Joshua say? Joshua 24:14 and following. Choose you this day whom you will serve. We decide. Are we going to be citizens of the Lord's kingdom? Or are we going to be citizens of the devil's kingdom? You can't be in both of them at the same time. You have to decide which one you're going to be in. This is the beauty of this kingdom, planned from all eternity for us. We fail often to see the beauty of the church because of the horror of denominationalism. We fail to see the wonder of the church because we just can't seem to get out of our mind in America denominationalism. Jesus said in Matthew 16:18, "Upon this rock I'll build my church." And he said to Peter, "I will give to you the keys of the kingdom." Matthew 16:19. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed on heaven. In Matthew 18:18, he gave all the apostles that power. Thus, in Acts 2:42, what's it say of the early church? They continued steadfastly in the traditions of the fathers. No, that's not what it said. Y'all don't agree with that? They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, in breaking of bread, in fellowship, in prayer. This is the Lord's kingdom. As a result of people being regenerated by this powerful word, they are different people. Thus, look at Isaiah 2 and verse number 4. He shall judge among the nations. He will rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Here's the point. Neither shall they lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn what? It's a different kingdom. They don't learn war anymore. We learn to love each other. We learn we are brothers and sisters in the Lord. You think your brothers and sisters are kind of weird? Well, I think all of you are weird. That's no reason not to love you because you think somebody's weird. Most people are weird when we really think of it. You look at people and you think, man, are they on medication or what? We love each other in spite of all of those little peculiarities that come in on us. And we truly care about one another. John 13:35. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you what? If you have love one for the other. 1 John 4:8. He that does not love does not know God, for God is love. So the result of being in the kingdom and learning God's ways, we don't have war with each other anymore in the church. The world's always going to have war. The passage in Isaiah 11, 6 through 11, or 6 through 9, talking about all these animals lying down together, all you have to do is go back to verse 4. So, well, I can't understand that. Yeah, you can. If I can, you can. And I can understand it. You go back to verse 4. It said the Messiah is going to have a rod sticking out of his mouth, and He's going to fight people with the breath of His mouth. Isaiah 11:4. Do you believe that? I want to tell you right now, I don't. Not literally. I believe it figuratively. He's not going to have a sword coming out of His mouth. That's a figurative expression. And if you can understand that, and if you can't, you don't have to worry about any of this. You're going to be okay anyway. God, it's like Dalton. You'll be all right. Don't worry about any of this. But if you can understand a sword coming out of His mouth, killing people with the breath of His mouth is figurative language. If you can get that, if your mind can grasp that, then go on with the paragraph. He continues to use figurative language about animals being at peace with one another, which is talking about the results of people hearing the Word and following it. They're at peace. Ephesians 2:14 through 16, we have peace with one another. Isaiah 11 explains to us this is all going to happen in God's holy mountain. We learned in Isaiah 2, verse 3, that God's holy mountain is the church. In the church, we have peace. We have harmony. We have love for one another. Those even at one time who were natural enemies, like Jews and Gentiles were natural enemies, when they came into the church and their soul was regenerated and they became new creatures, 2 Corinthians 5:17, they could be in the same body together. Why? Because they all accept the word of Jesus, which says, love one another, even your enemies. Matthew 5:44. Now, if we follow that, we will have that kind of peace. Like a wolf lying down with a lamb. Figurative language. It's used all through Isaiah. And it's not talking about in the world, it's talking about in the church, in His holy mountain. People in the world are always going to gossip. They're always going to backbite. They're always going to have wars. They're always going to have difficulties. Until they accept Christ, that's their lot. That's what they're going to have. But people in the citizen of Christ's kingdom, we have learned to overcome such things in our lives through following the Word of Christ. So what's he talking about in Isaiah 2 and Isaiah 11? I want to make it clear one more time. He's talking about the church. Thank you.